My guest today is Jake Thompson, leadership performance coach, keynote speaker, published author, and has been featured in Forbes Magazine and directly impacted over 80,000 people to date. Now, his programs help ambitious leaders boost their performance and create better personal and professional skills to help teams gain a competitive edge in the marketplace. Now, his new book, Lead Better Now, a practical guide to increase your influence as a leader, is a must-read book to help all of us to understand leadership and give us the tools to gain insight, confidence, and courage to go from follower to leader or employee to boss. So let's welcome leadership performance coach Jake Thompson to the show. Welcome, Jake.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be with you today.
Man, I enjoyed your book so much and I learned a lot, but now that I get to talk to you face to face, I'm expecting to learn even more. And what is your new book, Lead Better Now, about, and why does it stand out above all the other leadership books?
Yeah, so there are a ton of leadership books, right? You can walk into any bookstore and the shelves are covered with books on how to be a leader. This one very specifically is for that individual who's transitioning into management leadership for the first time or has been in it and feels like they're drowning. Honestly, it was sparked from a conversation I had with my wife who went through this experience during the early days of the pandemic. And then I started having conversations with more and more clients and realized we have a epidemic going on of individuals who are like, I learned the hard way. You're going to learn the hard way. You figure it out. You're on your own. And we fail to really train and develop people, even though if you were to ask any CEO of an organization, how important is your organization for having leaders? Like, how important is it to develop them? They would all agree. Yet we know from statistics and research, most fail to develop them. And so this book was really written to say, hey, listen, here's a lifeline for those of you that feel like you're drowning right now. I wanted to make it simple, straightforward, but very actionable so that you can pick it up, read it, and start immediately doing the things in it. It's not a lot of theory, right? You've read it. It's not a lot of theory. There's a little bit to set the stage, but a lot of it is actionable insights. Because when you're in the middle of a stormy waters, the last thing you want is somebody to jump in and teach you how to swim. You just want a life raft for a minute. Like, give me something to catch my breath. And that's what I'm hoping this book does for a lot of people.
It does, because and that's the very thing I found about your book, Jake, is when you're reading it, you put in all of these applications that we can start doing the very day that we read the book. It's not something that you have to, start journaling for 2 weeks and then get to the point to where you get to start it. You get to start immediately. You make this book very easy to read, very easy to understand. I love some of the storytelling in it because that kind of brings that picture to life as we're reading it. And then we're like, oh yeah, I've done that before. Or, oh, I never thought about that. So you bring all these things there, but boy, I have to say, this book instantly hits us in the face because there is a statement that I had to sit back and go, whoa, that's strong. And it reads, it's not your fault if you weren't trained to manage. It will be your fault if you choose not to learn to lead.
I mean, you think about it, we don't control what happened to us in the past, right? We don't control our starting position. We don't control where we are today. All of the previous choices and situations brought us to this point. However, once you're aware that there's a better option, once you're aware that there's a change, it's your responsibility to either decide to pursue it going forward or to accept the blame that you didn't. And that's really where I wanted to relieve people of. There's so many conversations of, I haven't been trained how to lead. I don't know what to do. I wasn't put in this position. And that's not your fault. However, now that you understand there's things to do to get better, it's 100% on you if you decide to take advantage of them going forward. And so I love being as I call it, the chief encouragement officer. And a lot of people think that's a lot of just cheerleading from the sideline. But as you introduced, I really consider myself a coach. And sometimes that coach is going to hit you in the face with a hard truth because they love you and they expect more out of you. And in today's world, we need a lot more people, especially in corporate America, willing to step up and start leading instead of going through the motions because that's how they learned previously.
You just had a statement pop into my head. Why are today's leaders that could have, let's say, 5 employees, 100 employees, or 10,000 employees, along the way, where have they lost their mentorship skills?
I don't know if a lot of them have had it to begin with because of the old culture we had, right? Leadership for a while was always considered do as I say, do as I say, do as I say. It wasn't ever do as I do, right? And so we have a ton of people that just haven't been trained in that regard. We also have, as fast as the world is moving, a lot of our focus goes onto the immediate ROI. And developing leaders is not an immediate payoff. It is not an Amazon Prime delivery. It is similar to farming, right? You plant the seed, you work the soil, you get water, sunlight, fertilizer, and it's going to be a while before you have a harvest. The day you plant the seed is not the day you have the harvest. And for a lot of people, we're, quote, too busy because we're very short-sighted in what we need to get done. And in public organizations, it's because we're trying to answer to stakeholders and boards, and we've got to turn a profit immediately to make everybody else happy. We don't have time to focus on the next 10 years. We got to figure this out right now. And in smaller businesses and entrepreneurs, they're thinking like, I'm just trying to get through the week, through the month. And when we play this short-sighted game, we might make some progress and win in the now, but what's going to happen is high performers are going to leave our organization because they're not being developed, which hurt us in the long run. Or we're going to be stuck with a lot of people who have no desire to lead or no skill set to lead because nobody's trained them. And we're having to put them in management leadership roles. And then we're constantly replacing them. And the cost of replacing an employee is up to 20% of their salary. So we're just churning through money, constantly replacing people versus saying, hey, listen, what's the common denominator? Me and the organization. Everything else, we keep changing all these people. What's going on? What within our culture, our training needs to change. And so it's really a combination of everything. And I think to that point as well, what makes it so vital right now is think about technology. You and I are doing this virtually. Think about how many people you have hybrid workplace, you have work remote, you have work from home. There are more options for people now than they've ever had of where they can live and who they can work for. And if you're not a leader who's actively invested in caring for, developing, growing people, if they're a high performer, they're going to leave and go somewhere that they want to, because we know people that will excel within your culture want to be developed. And so now, just because, hey, I live in Dallas, Texas, where I am, right? Just because, I don't have an organization in Dallas, there's a company, this company's in Kansas City. Well, I can live in Dallas and still work for them, and they care about developing and growing me. So I'm going to leave my Dallas job and I'm going to work for these people remote or go in once a month. And so there's more competition than ever, which is why the importance of developing your people so they can develop the people underneath them really helps not only to attract top talent, but to retain it as well.
Well, for you being a leadership coach and, in the process of writing this book, did you write this book during the pandemic?
No. So funny enough, my first book, Compete Every Day, came out June of 2020. So I wrote it in 2019. We were going to push it. And I said, let's go ahead and get this one out. And it's different in the sense that it's more, how do you make little mindset shifts and choices to have more success professionally and personally? So ideas about being intentional with your relationships, which I dive deeper in Lead Better Now, right? The idea of controlling your controllables, always giving your best. There's actionable things at the end, but it's still a very high level, shift your mindset, start applying some of these principles in your daily choices. This one I actually wrote last year. And the problem I ran into twofold, personally and selfishly, I'll say. The first book was a little bit of a beating to write. I wrote it based on an old corporate keynote, and I hated it. It was a terrible book. I read it, I edited it, I did not like it. And so I set it over here to the side. And that summer of 2019, I got asked to speak at a Big Brothers of America summit. And I'm like, my corporate talk doesn't work for this audience because I have kids 8 to 18 and I have adults 30 to 60 in the room. Like, I've got to bridge this gap. And so I started rewriting the ideas. Like, what are some catchy slogans for it? And so I rewrote all the chapters of the first book, and I thought, this is the book. So I had to rewrite it. So I rewrote like 45,000 words, and that was a beating. It was like finishing a workout and realizing I still have another 30 minutes. I stopped early. And so I kept putting off this second book of like, I got to just get back into that mentality. You got to get in that mindset. It's like training for a marathon. You finish it and you're like, I got to start the training for the next one. I got to get myself psyched back up. The other challenge I kept running into was, what exactly did I want to write about? I have a laundry list of ideas for books, but I wanted to be intentional with this one. And then the day I was floating around, I half written a handful of introductions for different things. And then the day as I opened this book, the day my wife walked into my office and just kind of had the breakdown on what she was going through, I thought, this is the book. I've had this same conversation with clients, and only now did it click. So then I just started pulling it all together and saying this was the one. And so, it really, the seeds and a lot of the things learned have been the last few years, because I didn't truly start working as a really keynote speaker until the end of 2018. I did a few gigs in 14 and 17, but the end of 2018. And so then in 2020 and 1 and 2, I'm having conversations with clients. This is what I kept seeing. But it never clicked with me until that one conversation with her that I thought, this is the book. And so then we wrote the book. And so that's how it came out, and was very excited to release it at the beginning of this year, especially as you hear a lot of organizations talking about they're removing remote work. Like, you're back in the office now, we're face to face. And so all of these dynamics that are going on in the workforce right now, the need for strong leaders and people developing other leaders is more vital than ever.
It is. And one of the things that, you and I are probably the same in one aspect. Self-motivated. Nobody has to tell us what to do. We do it. We don't like sitting around. We may be, towards type A more than type B.
Very much.
But mentally, with those that have been working from home, and for those, they have to be truly self-motivated. You're either going to have those working from home being self-motivated versus those that are lazy and just kind of getting by. Those who are self-motivated are really leaning more towards, I feel, that they have leadership qualities within them, because they don't need anybody to tell them to get the job done, and they may even give the 110%, which is what people truly need to give. So for you, and you've talked to so many companies and leaders across the country, is there this dividing line between those that work from home and then those that are in the office?
Yeah, so it's funny. Every organization is very different. Some of the spaces that I do a lot of work, construction and manufacturing, there is no work from home. Like, you're on a job site, you're there. Other organizations on the sales side, you're covering territories. So you're spread out all over regions and states, and you're working from home. And what you see is what you see in a lot of organizations, right? You have high performers, you have a lot of people in the middle, and then you have the low performers. Working from home, typically the low performers can hide out a little bit better because they're not checking in every day. There's some virtual check-ins and things like that, but it's harder to manage that, right? There's a little bit harder from being in that in person. High performers can do really well, but what we see is high performers also do really well around other high performers. In fact, there was a study Northwestern University did in 2017 that showed putting an employee by a high performer can increase their own performance by up to 25%. On the flip side, putting a high performer seated near a low performer can decrease their performance by like 30%. So the environment we're in is really intentional and it needs to be intentional for that reason. And so you're seeing it, but what I've found is seeing a lot of people that are doing a combination. It's that hybrid, right? Hey, we want you in 3 days a week, and you can work from home 2 days a week. And we care about the work you're doing versus micromanaging every single hour. And I think that's where it helps, because culture, I've worked with organizations, I've seen organizations that are 100% remote. They have incredible cultures. They organize in-person events throughout the year to bring everybody in. But it's still a really big challenge virtually to create a culture where everybody feels trusted and connected and a part of something that gets them excited, to your point, motivated to do that work when you're always remote. And so that's why that role of a leader is even more important, because the connection part that we talk about in the book, you've got to go above and beyond connecting more intentionally, because you're not going to run into people at the water cooler. You're not going to bump into them at the hallway. You're not going to be like, oh, let's just go grab lunch. It's like, hey, let's schedule this Teams meeting to sit and have lunch. And so I recommend for remote teams of like, you need to be connecting with a person on your team every week. And even if it's something of, hey, it's 5 o'clock, you're in California, I'm in Texas. Hey, I'll do it at 6, you do it at 4. Grab a beer, grab a glass of wine. Let's just hop on Teams and have a conversation to get to know you since we work together. Because some of us, even if we're in the office, have worked with people for 5 to 10 years, and we couldn't tell you anything about them outside of work. We can 100% tell you what project they owe us and what they're behind on, but we couldn't tell you if they're a dog person, they're a cat person, anything about them. And that's a real problem, one, for a leader if you don't know your people, but two, in creating a working collaborative culture. If people don't know each other, they're not going to work hard with or for each other.
That's true. And the fact that if a leader or a boss or an owner starts understanding and visiting with each single employee, and you bring this up in the book, which I really loved, because it's not for them to get together and talk about work. It's to get together and talk about things that have nothing to do with work, just really getting to know who they are, what's your family like. And like you said, or do you like dogs or cats, and you play golf or tennis or whatever. And I think that encourages the employee that the owner or the boss cares, has an open communication. And I think that also improves the performance of the employee.
Well, the employee feels appreciated at that point because you're no longer just a number on payroll. You're a person that's a part of the team. The other thing it does is it starts to build trust, which is really vital because you think about there's no separation of work and life. Like if you are going through a divorce or you've got a really sick kid, that's going to impact how you show up at the office. And if you've built no relationship with your coworkers or your boss doesn't know really anything about you except the project you're working on, and all of a sudden your work starts to slip because you're dealing with a parent who's passing, or you're dealing with this, they automatically assume it's a performance. Well, they're just disengaging. They're just unmotivated. They can make all sorts of assumptions, right? Because there's silence there. Versus knowing the person, having built the trust to where they actually can, hey, listen, I know my work hasn't been the best lately. Here's what's going on right now in personal life. I need a little bit of patience and grace to let me get through this season. That changes it because then as a leader, if you're able to step in and support them during that season, they're way more motivated for you. They're way more bought into what you're doing because you're supporting them in a season when most people wouldn't and just assume they're having work issues. But you don't get there unless you know them. And so why having those non-work conversations are important. We actually just did it a couple of hours ago. I did a lunch workshop for a company on business relationship building and how sales, even though it's icky, it's really relationship building. And so we talked about it, but one of the things I had them do was pair up with teammates and just 60 seconds back and forth sharing stuff. And it was really funny. They were like, oh, I didn't know this. And here's what I learned about this person. And even though we've worked together for like 2 years, we talk every week, I didn't know anything about you. And so all of a sudden they started to see, oh, we have this in common. Oh, I want to have more of that conversation later. Let's continue building that so that we become more collaborative together.
I love that. Now, in your book, you mention the 3 C's: compete, connect, communicate. Explain.
Yeah, so the foundation of all the work that I do is the idea of competing every day with yourself, which at its core is self-leadership. It's the discipline we talked about. It's the idea that you wake up every day and compete to be better than the day before, not for yourself, but for all the people you work alongside and care for so that you bring them the best version of yourself. And I believe that's foundational to a leader, is until you lead yourself, you're never going to earn the right to lead others. The next step is not authoritarianism. It is not dictatorship. It's connect. It's what we just talked about, getting to know people, making an investment, as we call it, a relational deposit into that piggy bank. And then lastly, it's on the communication. Like, where are we going? What kind of feedback can I give you? We've got a really bad habit of only giving feedback when people mess up. We're not catching them doing good. We're not giving them positive, productive feedback on where they can improve. And so when we don't connect, they automatically get into a routine of the only time I hear from my leaders when I do something wrong. So then they start to shut down and become defensive. So the importance of connecting with the person opens up some of those defenses. That opens up the brick walls. And then when we become much more consistent with giving good feedback and constructive feedback, they're more open to receiving it. And so really, like, there's a million other things you can do in leadership, right? There's negotiation, there's casting bigger visions, there's all sorts of things. But when you're new to leadership, the most important things you need to do are to compete with yourself, to lead yourself, to connect with the people in your charge, and then focus on communicating feedback and coaching them up. And so that's why this book really just starts with those three pillars, because there's a million books on the bookshelf that can dive deeper on a ton of things. But I found to create influence, those are the three biggest starting blocks that a lot of people fail to realize are 100% in their control.
I love that, Jake. And you brought something up, and it's a very important section in your book. And I want you to kind of go in a little bit more detail, but at the same time, I want everybody to buy Jake's book, Lead Better Now, because he really breaks all of this down to where you can understand it. But why is it important to compete with ourselves?
Yeah, so we live in a culture that loves the idea of competition with others, right? Businesses, you're competing against everyone else. Sports, your favorite team is competing with everyone else. The true reality is we don't control anyone else. You only control the person you see in the mirror. And the idea of competing with yourself is really the idea of consistent growth day after day after day. And there's a couple of reasons that's so vital. First, your walk talks louder than your talk ever will. So your actions display something more than anything that you could say. I use the story in the book to tease, but I was a kid growing up in a small Texas town. I worked in my dad's little single gas station. And one day I was cutting corners, sweeping the parking lot. I was in a rush, as kids are those days, because in my head, a parking lot's going to get dirty again in 10 to 15 minutes. Like, it didn't matter how good a job I do, it's still going to get dirty. And my dad really poured into me that day the idea that people are always watching you, whether you realize it or not. And you're either a lesson of someone to follow or an example of someone to avoid. And it hit me that day because for us, we live in a small town. And to him, he said, listen, people know you're my son. They see you do this. They may think we cut corners in the store. Or as I told my construction clients today, hey, if they see you do this, they may assume you do shoddy work on the job site, which makes them more hesitant to work with you again. And for leaders, I've worked with some early in my career, and a lot of us listening have, where the person holds everyone else to a higher standard of excellence than they do themselves. And that crushes a culture. Because when the boss tells you to do this and do this and do this, and then they're the complete opposite. They're a mess. They clock out early every Friday. They tell you to stay late. They get mad at you when you don't stay late, yet they're leaving early to go play or happy hour. People check out and they disengage and they quit, or they go to find another job. And that's why this idea of unless you lead yourself, you're not earning the right to lead others. And the way I always look at it is through that lens of competition, which is strive to gain or win something. And if every day you can wake up, not be perfect, but strive to improve, you not only put yourself in a position to where a year from now, you're going to be doing better work than you do today, but you also set the benchmark and the pace for your team to do the same. Because I would imagine everybody listening, if you have one direct report or 100, 1 year from now, you want them to do better work than they do today. And my question to all of my audiences and clients are, what are you doing every day to make sure you're doing better work a year from now than you are today? Because if you're not, why should your team?
That's exactly right. And you give the absolute best examples in this book. And I really kind of laughed and you're right. It's kind of like the wellness coach giving a speech in front of a bunch of people, but his belly is hanging over his belt.
The old Chris Farley, Matt Foley, SNL skit. Like that is the perfect analogy. Living in a van down by the river, disheveled, overweight, yet I'm going to teach you how to chase your dreams. And everybody's like, what? That's what we do.
It is. It is. And the reason why I fell in love with your book, because like I said before, you can apply everything that we read in your book right now. You may not be in a leader position at the moment, but if you start now and start preparing, it's like preparing for your dream. If you're chasing your dream, you have to do things now and not later. Because in a way, it's a step of faith. It means that you believe in your dream, you believe in yourself, and the only way to get there and see it come to pass is you got to start doing those things now. And that means all employees if they have a dream of like, one of these days, I want to be the head of that department, then start working on those things now, because like you said, there's always someone watching. So that means your current boss could be watching you, could actually see little minute improvements day after day, month after month, a year, 2 years later. Then when he gets promoted, he may be looking at you to take over. And so start now, start working on yourself. But like you also said too, you're going to learn that the environment that you're in, you may find out that, okay, hey, there's a job opening in such and such place down the street or in the next town. And you may find that all that work you've been doing on yourself, you've been preparing, well, for a promotion somewhere else.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to somebody this morning about it. The difference in behavior when you want to grow throughout your career, when you're going to climb up, when there's going to be an opportunity to lead one day, you behave very differently than if you're going through the motion saying, well, I hope I get promoted. I hope there's an opportunity. Because when you're hoping, you're not really working. You're assuming, well, when there's a job opening, I'll start getting ready for it. When right now, hey, listen, I'm at a manager level. I'm going to move to a director level. I want that role. I want to be a VP. Then you're going to start doing the work now consistently to prepare for it, because you don't know when that opportunity will come. And if you're not ready for that opportunity, you may miss out on it and then have to wait even longer, because the person that's going to capitalize on it is the one who gets prepared and does the work before they ever see that opportunity in sight.
You brought something else up in your book, which I thought was extremely interesting. So let's say you have an organization, and let's just pick a sales organization. Yep. So you have someone that's a very high earner, and then the person head of that department, or maybe it's the boss or whatever, they leave, and then, hey, it's time to promote somebody into this position. Let's pick the high earner. Why is that sometimes a bad idea?
Well, it's probably a bad idea, similar to what you and I were laughing about being similar type A personalities, is that when you're an individual performer, especially we see this in sales, the success lies on your shoulders and you love it because you live and die with your own work ethic, your own results, and nobody's going to outwork you. You're going to be in it all day, every day. Leadership, however, the success is on other people. Like, it's on your team. And so it's the perfect example of going from, say, the star basketball player who influences everything to the coach. And no matter how well you drop X's and O's, it's on other people to execute. And then it's on you to coach them up. And that's really the hardest shift for people to make, when especially you're driven, you're type A, you have a ton of success. And we see this in sales probably more than every other industry. But just because you're great at sales and you've got that skill set doesn't mean you're prepared to manage and lead. Just because you were great here doesn't mean you're going to be great there. In fact, some of the organizations I've worked with, it was actually people that struggled at sales that became phenomenal managers, because it's a different skill set. Some people make those jumps just fine. But just because they're your top earner now doesn't mean they're going to be your top manager. And sometimes your top earner should stay your top earner, because they're going to make more money. They're going to be all content, focused on them. And then you promote somebody who's more capable of leading, managing, and honestly getting out of the spotlight to help other people step up. And so that is the big mental shift that we have to make going into leadership, is no longer is success just about what you do, but it's about what you help other people do.
That is spot on. I mean, it's almost like if somebody got promoted ahead of the high earner, and then the high earner's like, I should have been promoted. I'm the one that makes the most sales around here. But like you said, that doesn't mean it's going to make you a great leader, because you're focused on what you do, because sales can be a very individual, independent thing, even amongst a group of people. It's kind of like real estate.
Yeah.
But then, like you said, they're not going to be able to transition the work ethic and the mindset of going from me to them. But then you have someone who is, like you said, could be a low earner, but putting them in a leadership position actually works out better.
Yeah, it's sports, right? It's very rare that the star, the best of the best, the top talented player becomes a great coach. A lot of times what we look at are the great coaches. They played the sport, but they were never the best of the best. They were never the most athletic. They never had the top talent. They were typically undersized or grinders or guys who really had to learn the game because they couldn't rely on physical skill set. And so they come at it from a very different perspective than other guys. There's always anomalies for that, but very rarely are we the exception to the rule. And so understanding that and even getting into that mindset of if I'm truly committed, if I want to grow, if I want to go from top salesperson to running an organization, I have to learn like as I move up, I'm not doing the sales anymore. I'm a coach and I've got to focus on getting other people to sell. And if I can't handle that because they're not doing it the way I wanted to or the way I did it, and I get frustrated and give up, then I probably need to go back to sales and make great money and do what I enjoy, but then not get upset when other people move up throughout the organization because they're focused on not me, but we.
Exactly. You bring up fear in your book. How can we use fear to move us forward instead of trapping us in our comfort zones that could lead to regret?
Yeah, it's funny. At the beginning of the book, one of the things I wanted to set the stage with were the challenges that come into leadership. Fear, ego, situation, all of these things, we kind of break them down of what to expect because I look at it similar to a race. If you sign up to run a marathon and you don't think it's going to be that hard or that bad and you don't train for it, and then you get about 2 miles, 3 miles in and you think, what did I get myself into? You mentally will check out. You're like, this is too hard. You're going to talk yourself out of it. You're going to beat yourself up. Versus if you train for it, if you know this is going to be difficult. Hey, at mile 11, my feet are probably going to start hurting. I'm prepared for it. Then it happens. It's just par for the course. And so fear is one of those things that is inevitable when you're growing because growth is uncomfortable. And it means you have to go to a new level. You have to do new things. You have to get out of your comfort zone in order to develop new skill sets. And so changing the relationship with fear and more than anything, discomfort, to understand that it's part of the process. And the only way you become comfortable at something is doing more of it. So maybe you're listening to this and you do management meetings all the time. You go over KPIs, you go over performance tasks and marks, but you read the book and you think, I've never done a coaching meeting. And so you're a little scared because you're like, what questions to ask? How do I manage a coaching meeting? I've done management. I don't know how to handle this. It's going to be a little sloppy. It's like playing a musical instrument. But over time, the more you do it, the more comfortable you're going to get with it, the better you're going to be. And so leaning into that discomfort as this is part of the learning process is a heavy piece for leadership because just like setting your ego aside to say, this is not about me, it's about how do I help them. You've got to set that ego and fear aside to say what I'm doing is more important than a little bit of discomfort I'm feeling for the big picture.
That's true. As an example, I have interviewed tons of famous guitar players. And one of the things that you would hear over and over again when the first time they ever picked one up, maybe their dad gave them a $12 guitar or whatever. And then as they really kind of got into it and they started practicing, and then they were working on things that are very difficult to learn. And it was week after week, hour after hour. And they're like, am I ever going to get this? They wouldn't give up, but then one day it just clicks. It's part of them. They never forget it. And now they just play it as fluently as possible. And that goes with anything that if we just take time to learn, sure, it may be hard in the beginning, but it's not always going to be hard because that one day is going to happen where it just clicks.
100%. It's getting those reps in, intentional reps with a focus on improvement day after day after day. And eventually you get to a point where everybody thinks, man, you're just a natural at this. And you're like, you have no idea how many hours went into it to get to this point.
That's true. But I have to say, Jake, there was one thing in your book that it came at the perfect time. This past weekend, I was not really in, let's say, overly great mood. Even on Monday, and I was reading your book and taking notes, and then I get to this one section in your book, and I sat there and I went, "Oh my gosh, I needed that, and I needed it like right now. And in your book, this one important lesson that I learned was we get burned out when we focus on what we do and forget why we do it. I've always been self-motivated, but I have to keep reminding myself that I am a bamboo tree and to keep focusing on the why.
Focusing on those roots. Yeah, it's funny. So last week, probably went through a similar situation. So myself, my wife, her parents, her brother, his family, and my mom all went on an Alaskan cruise. We're on a vacation together. And cruise ship, man, it's all the food you can have, it's all the drink, but there's a gym. And so I am first couple of days on the trip, I'm like, I'm going to the gym. I'm gonna get in there, get a workout. It's a sea day. Well, then we start having excursions, right? Days off. And I'm like, I gotta go do this. Like my nephew's there. Like he's talked about going to the gym. I got to make sure I'm in the gym, right? I don't really feel super motivated to do this, but I'm going to be walking, I'm going to be eating, and I've got to live out what I say, right? I've got to focus on competing every day with myself. And so I laugh because my wife will say it. Her friends are like, are you ever like not in a good mood or not motivated? I was like, I'm not motivated every day at all. Like I'm going to walk out and just grind through a workout some days. But it's not the what for me. It's kind of the why. Like if I focused on the what, I would not be doing what I do. Why? Because I don't like sitting through TSA or dealing with flight delays or cancellations or showing up to a rental car booth and they don't have the car that I prepaid for. Like there's a million whats that you deal with. But the why I love, and it will always remind me of that. And so that's kind of the big piece of leadership. Like there's going to be frustrating moments. There's going to be people you pour into that do not take the opportunity or reins. There's going to be things outside of your control, as we've seen in the marketplace all the time, that impact what we do. And it can frustrate us and it can have us down, or we can understand what's in our control and focus on why it matters to us in the big picture. And that doesn't change the situation. It doesn't all of a sudden magically remove everything. But what it does is help how we show up. Because if you look at it from there's an old cartoon that has two people, exact same job, exact same house, exact same life, exact same money, exact same everything. One's in a positive mood, one's in a negative mood. The world is great. There's opportunity. I'm focused on my why. I love living this out. One grumbles because they don't have as much as someone else. They're dealing with all this crap. And so two people with the same everything can have two completely different worldviews based on what are they focused on. And that's where it always goes back to for us as leaders is don't ever get into leadership for yourself because that's not what it's about. It's all about how do I help other people? And that ultimately, if we think about it from a bigger picture, spiritual life standpoint, that's what your legacy is about. It's the impact you make on others. It's not the dollars you bring in. It's not the title on your business card. It's what did I do to make an impact on others? And that's ultimately leadership.
And that really comes down to the why. Because when I read that and continued reading your book, I mean, even when I woke up on Tuesday morning, I was still not in the best of mood. But then, bam, I received an email from a friend of mine who I actually interviewed, let's say, 8 months ago, and just out I went, there's the why. You know, because then
it's funny how those happen.
Yeah, because for you, I mean, even for you, you know, we understand that sometimes we get reminded what the why is. Like, this is why I do this. And like you said, it comes down to not, the why is not us. The why is the people around us. You know, for me, I do almost 200 interviews a year. But the thing is I tell people the interview is not for me. It is for my guest. This is not me. This is not about me. It's about them. And my job is to be a cheerleader, to be an encourager, to shine a light upon their hard work. You know, like for you, you spent all this time creating this amazing book for leaders to be better and to birth new leaders that are out there that maybe they don't know that they're a leader yet. But if they get this book, they're going to find out that I believe that there's a leader in all of us, but it's up to us to pull them out.
I love that you shared that note from your friend, because I mean, for the listeners, if you don't have a podcast or a show, write a blog, anything like that, it sometimes feels like you're talking out to the space, right? We get on here, you and I are having a conversation, but at the same time, you're thinking, does this register? Like, does anybody get this? And that makes it tough, right? Because you're focused on that what sometimes. But then you talked about you got a note from a friend. And I always think back to earlier this year. So we started Compete Every Day. I started selling t-shirts out of the trunk of my car in 2011. And this motivational brand that has obviously changed, but we still have some of the merchandise and clothing. And a couple times over the years, we thought about getting rid of it because I was like, I'm focused on speaking and coaching and writing. And my wife and a few of our friends are like, you can't get rid of the apparel. Like it's not only was it part of the story, but like it still reinforces what you do. And there was a 2-week period where I'm just brainstorming of how do we just kind of separate this out? And my team gets an Instagram message from a guy who'd fallen off a roof doing a roofing project, fractured his back, lost sight in one of his eyes. They thought he was going to die. And he sent us a note and it showed him in the hospital bed. And his brother had bought one of our flags, a couple of our shirts and wristbands as a way to encourage him while he's going through rehab. And so he sent these pictures of his journey back. And I'm in the airport bawling and just reading this. And I shared with my wife, and they were like, you can't get rid of the clothing. Like, these are your little whys of, even if it's a headache, that's the what. The headaches are the what. This is the why. And so for those listening, I say that because if Ward Show has ever impacted you, you're like, oh, I like it. I listen every week. I've told friends about it. But you've never sent him a note. Like, this is my challenge, encouragement to you to send a note, because he's going to have a day in the next 2 years, just like this past weekend. He wakes up, he's a little frustrated. I got 200 interviews this year. And then he's going to go into that folder in his inbox where I bet he's got them. And he's going to read one of the emails you're going to send him over the next week and think, nope, I'm good. Let's keep going. And so that I want to tell for them, for you, because this can be very lonely sometimes. And it's very easy to forget the what. And so as leaders, for those of you listening, like anybody that's impacted you sending them a note means more than you ever think. And also from a leadership standpoint, that's how you build influence, right? You express the gratitude. But that's the one thing that, especially 200 shows a year, is so much work. And most people don't realize that. I do. I'm right there with you. I get it. And so I just want to encourage everybody for that, or a mentor or somebody who's poured into you, just send them a note and let them know, because it helps them focus on their why. And if they didn't have the why, they wouldn't have been able to impact you.
Jake, man, I appreciate that so much. And I have been focused on the why since Monday, since I read that part of your book, because I kept going back to like, that's why I do this. That's why I do this. And at the same time, I bet I've heard the bamboo story from 3 different people in the last 3 months. And I'm like, okay, God, I get it. I'm a bamboo tree. I am laying down them roots, but there's going to be that day when I break ground and I'm going to be 80 feet tall.
That's right. That's right. It's all about, and that's it's the joy, right? It's the focusing on the why and doing the work, not necessarily noticed on the outcome. And I told someone this earlier this week. I said, when you're a farmer, yes, you want the harvest, but your focus is on, how am I caring for the seeds? How am I planting the seeds? How am I giving them sunlight? How am I watering? How am I working, knowing the harvest is going to take care of itself? The bamboo tree, how am I watering? How am I caring for it? I know it's going to grow. I don't know when it's going to grow, but I know it's going to grow. All I care about is, what am I doing today on the work? And that's really where you see the separation, right? The people who say they want to be leaders, they really want the salary increase and the recognition. They don't want to do the work. And they may get a quick little hit, but what you're going to see happen is somebody else that's focused on the bamboo tree is going to just soar in the amount of impact they can make.
That's right. And I believe you said something else in your book, which I'm a huge believer in. Be consistent. Don't stop. Be consistent. It's like, and you know this, it's like dealing with social media algorithms. Consistency wins. So in life, at your job, at your career, with your family, be consistent.
That's the key to anything, right? As I laughed, I was talking earlier today as well. We talked about just outlasting folks, right? I've made a post on Instagram about lessons learned from business. And I was like, A lot of it's just being willing to stick with it long enough. Like it's just being consistently showing up. I'm not seeing an outcome. I'm not seeing that bamboo tree grow, but I'm going to keep showing up, keep working, keep showing up, keep working. And over time, James Clear talks about in Atomic Habits, like that's the compounding effect. That's where everything takes off. And you do that by focusing on the why and not getting distracted by where's the outcome, where's the payoff, where's the reward. You focus on that why and why you're doing it. And that's what I could encourage everyone else, because if, as a leader, if you're consistent, you're going to teach and model how to be consistent. You're going to make deposits in your team. You're going to do all of the things that grow yourself and your people. And a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, you're going to look up and be like, we are a completely transformed organization. And it didn't happen overnight, but it happened consistently over time because we kept showing up.
And see that, and you took the words right out of my mouth. Being consistent every single day, we are unknowingly making little deposits that are building up a foundation, could be building up a treasure. And then one day you're going to look back going, like you just said, wow. And it was all due to the consistency of doing the job, doing the work, and focusing on the why. Now, in your book, I thought this was one of the best comparisons I ever read. But your comparison of a thermometer and a thermostat. I mean, when it comes to leaders, as a simple yet effective eye-opener when I read it.
Yeah, I would love to say I was the original quoter of that, but it has been circulating for years, almost like the starfish story on the beach. But it's really the idea, and I love it because you see them every day, right? A thermometer reacts to everything around them. It reads the temperature of the room and adjusts what they are. A thermostat sets the temperature. It decides this is who I am, this is how we're going to be. And it's that mode of consistency. And if you think about any relationship you've ever been in, personally or professionally, when the other person's a thermometer, you have a really hard time being in relationship with them because you don't know what to expect. One day they're in a good mood, next day they're in a bad mood. Today they blow up on you, tomorrow they're happy to see you. Thermostat may be, quote, more boring, but they're consistent. You know what to expect. I know I can go to you with bad news and you're not going to just completely blow up at me. We're going to talk about the situation. We're going to solve it. I know we can have a real conversation and I'm not terrified of it. And so that's where that idea of your attitude is 100% in your control. Your emotions, you don't, but your attitude and your response is 100% in your control. So how can you be a thermostat, consistent in how you show up, what attitude you choose, so that the people around you, especially those you lead, know what to expect and can build that trust with you and that vulnerability with you because they're not afraid to come to you because they're guessing on who you might be today.
Yeah, and I think I would rather have a thermostat, being the head of the department or the business owner, and not someone who is a thermometer, because that causes so much inconsistency and really makes a horrible workplace.
Oh my God. It creates so much angst on the individual if you know the other person's a thermometer because you're like, I don't know what to do in this situation because I don't know how you're going to respond. And so I'm scared. So I don't come to you with bad news or good news because then it puts everybody on eggshells.
Well, yeah. And when I read that section of your book, I started laughing because my high school Spanish teacher was a thermometer. So if every student in the school knew if she showed up wearing this very particular blue dress, you better keep your mouth shut. You don't tick her off because it means she is not in a good mood. And I think she wore it on purpose because everybody knew about it. So when I read this in your book, I went, she was a thermometer. So we avoided it like the plague. But
yep.
One of the most important parts of your book reminded me of something in my own life. I have my grandfather's Bible, and I really wish I would have had it here to show it to you. But in the back of his Bible, he wrote, "The power of life and death reside in the tongue." Proverbs 18:21, which I noticed was in your book. And beside that scripture My grandfather wrote, "Did I hurt anyone with my words today?" But millions of people are hurting themselves with the way that they talk to themselves. And you cover this in depth in your book, which I found phenomenal.
Yeah, no one talks to you on a daily basis more than you do. And being mindful, first aware of what we're talking and saying to ourselves is the first step, but then focusing on redirecting and changing. A lot of us use can't when we really should be using won't, right? There's words that we're using that don't really fit. We're choosing not to do something versus we're actually unable to do it. And so I really want to shine light in that when we talk about the competing with yourself, because once you start to be more aware of how you talk to yourself, you can adjust it, but it's also going to impact how you talk with your team and the language you're using internally within your culture and how you lead. And so it dives into it. There's two phenomenal books for any of our listeners. Obviously, I want you to read this, but if you want to dive deeper, you're like, man, my self-talk sucks. I have negative thoughts all the time. Chatter by Ethan Kross is a phenomenal read. And then John Acuff's book, Soundtracks, is as I say, it's a non-sciencey science way how to look at affirmations and talking to yourself. But it's really important for each of us to get a better grasp because it impacts our confidence. It impacts how we show up in situations. And as a leader, as we've talked about, the example you set sets the standard for the rest of your team. And so if we want to help our teams improve how they show up, how they handle fear, how they lean into discomfort, we've got to control what we say and put into them. And then in the same token, that same encouragement, like our job as leaders is to speak into people because there may be somebody on your team who's never been told somebody's proud of them, who's never been told a good job. Like they are a high performer. They expect to do well. And so when they do well, it's just expected. But I always laugh of like, man, you have high performers. And I was an A student growing up, and it would always frustrate me when I do really well on a test. And I really wouldn't get any feedback or praise from the teacher. It was expected. You're the A student. You're supposed to get an A. And somebody who was like a D or a C student might get a C plus or a B minus. The teacher would be like, oh, what a phenomenal job. I'm like, what the heck? Like I did better. Like what's wrong with that? And it's funny now looking at it because it was expected of me, but it didn't mean I didn't want to hear it. And so as leaders, like how are we using our words to catch our teams doing good, to reinforce areas of our values or culture? And just because someone is expected to do a good job and they do a good job doesn't mean we shouldn't praise them for it, because rewarded behavior is repeated behavior. So we look at how do we talk to ourselves, but how do we talk to others?
Yeah, it's funny because I love baseball. And you have those seasoned players that get up to the plate, and everybody's expecting, oh man, it's like watching Aaron Judge or other players that they get to the plate, and all you know is, I just want to see him hit a home run because that's what you expect. But then you get the guy that gets called up from AAA, and he's playing his first game or is within his first 5 games, but when he hits a home run, everybody goes nuts, like, oh man, could this guy be the next best thing? When we're already looking at the best thing, but it's expected.
Yeah, it's expected. It's everybody gets excited for the one that doesn't. There was a video circulating on Twitter last month maybe, and it was from the late 70s, maybe early 80s, and it was the Atlanta Braves, and it was showing a game that went to like 20 innings or something, and they pull in this relief pitcher. They put him up with 2 outs in the last inning, and you're just expecting game over. Like fans have already started leaving. It's this relief pitcher. We just got to put a warm body up there to bat. And he hits a home run and just shocks everybody, and the Braves win. And I remember looking at that and laughing because it's like, yeah, the unexpected moment creates the excitement. But we don't get as excited when the high performers do what the high performers do because, well, it's their job. When we should be just as excited because we want to continue to praise and congratulate them so they stay with us because we need those high performers.
Yeah, I saw the same video, and I bet I watched it a few times because I thought it was the coolest thing ever. Now, in your book, I loved the chapter on competing against the clock. Now, I was making my list, and I'm like, I already do most of those things, but explain what competing against the clock means and why it can help us accomplish real goals And what's the difference between competing against the clock versus competing with ourselves?
Yeah, so the clock I always talk about is really time management, right? But more than time management, it's focus management, because really our focus is what we're trying to control. And what I wanted to do is, as a leader, right, you go from individual performer to a leader, you have more tasks on your plate. You have administrative work. You have all sorts of things that are now added to your responsibilities. Oh, by the way, you're responsible for people. So one of the things that we see is a huge overwhelm. There's not enough hours in the day. There's all of these issues. And some of those are actually correctable changes, because what we're doing is we're doing more work, but we're not prioritizing it correctly. We're doing busy work, but not the right, better work. And so the chapter really dives into what are things, simple things such as quit letting your inbox determine what your priorities are for the day. Like, set your priorities the night before and start after them. So it's little things designed to help you squeeze more time out of the day by being more intentional with where your focus goes, because you're going to have more responsibility and leadership and less available hours.
Say, one of the things that I learned a few years ago, do not, when you first start your day, never, ever, ever open up your inbox. Because if it's going to be your day, the moment you open up that inbox, it's going to be somebody else's day. Because
OPP.
Now you're being their slave. I hate to use that term, but that's exactly what it is. And it was so funny because you used the term OPP.
Yep. Other people's priorities. That's the inbox.
Yeah. So I've learned never open up the inbox the first thing in the morning. And I mean, I literally cut my notifications off on my smartphone, except for email, but I literally turn off the ones for texting. And
love it.
And so I was telling my wife yesterday, I said, one of the things that I did within the last 2 weeks is I started literally cutting off my cell phone for 10 days straight to break the habit of just, now we're trained monkeys with smartphones. We just grab it unknowingly. It's almost like it's almost like a smoker grabbing a cigarette. I smoke 2 packs a day. Yeah, but you're picking up your phone about, equivalent to 24 cigarettes. But what did you accomplish? Because that device has stolen productive time. And you need to figure out where your priorities are and what is your dream? What is your goal? So I find social media, even though it's important, it's a time stealer. It's a time waster. It's connected to our cell phone. And so for 10 days, I cut my cell phone off. I'm like, you know what? If there's anybody out there who thinks that they truly need to contact me, that's what email's for. And
yeah, you got to be intentional. You have to be so intentional with it, because the people designing the devices know that they're more addictive than casinos and slot machines. Like, they know exactly what they're doing, and there's more money poured into them that you're never going to be able to outsmart them. And so being intentional with how you just did. The book Stolen Focus by Johan Hari is a phenomenal read around this, but how it's even harder for us today to disconnect, to do some of those things. And so he talks about essentially know the fight you're in, and then here's ways to try to improve your odds.
I'm going to have to read that book. Because I don't like wasting time.
It'll blow your mind, though, with some of the insights. You're like, oh my gosh, like that's what I'm up against.
Yeah. And, I believe that everybody has a dream within them. Some people don't think that they'll ever, that they deserve having a dream or have the guts to step out and chase it, because it is a journey that cannot literally be explained unless you live it. You know what that's like. I know what that's like, but we have millions, if not billions, of dreamers on this planet, but there's also leaders that are just, they have what it takes. They don't know they have what it takes. But Jake, your book will bring that out of people. And ladies and gentlemen, you do not have to be a leader to read his book, but if you start reading it, and you start putting the time in, you start being consistent. And like Jake said, and I've seen this in my own life, there is always somebody watching. And that person watching could be the one, well, gives you the breakthrough. And then you become a leader, or you never know, depending on what position or genre you're in, you could also end up being a superstar. So, but Jake, you give us the tools.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed getting to chat with you about it, and so gracious for your time today. I hope for any listeners that pick it up, it gives them, like you said, right? Something they can immediately put into practice. And even if you don't feel like you're in a leadership spot or a leader yet, the good news is you have the opportunity ahead of you, and there's a nice little playbook that can help you start stepping into that.
That's it. And ladies and gentlemen, one of the biggest challenges today is the promotion of talented individuals to leadership positions without the proper training to succeed in their new role. But did you know that 60% of new managers fail within the first 24 months of their promotion? But it's Jake Thompson's book, Lead Better Now, a practical guide to increase your influence as a leader. Discover practical insights and strategies so that you can implement today to reshape your leadership experience and start driving the positive change that you want to see in your team, department, and organization. Now, if you're an employee, but you want to move up the ladder, take the step of faith, start acting like a leader with the help of Jake's book, Lead Better Now, which is available now on jakethompson.com or amazon.com. And again, Jake, I want to thank you so much for coming onto the program and just giving us some tools that we can add to our own toolbox in life and career and do great things, not just for us, but for other people.
Ward, thank you so much. This was an honor, and really enjoyed the conversation and insightful questions today.
Hey, I did too, Jake. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank everyone for watching and listening. Catch all of the replays of our interviews with our special guest on our YouTube channel, as well as a dozen audio channels as well, such as iTunes and Spotify. So please subscribe, and we thank you for your support. And remember, something spectacular happens when you learn something new. See you next time.